Many children grow up with building blocks with which to play. I saw a funny cartoon entitled Toys from the Preschool of Hard Knocks. And in the cartoon, there were these big square blocks all over the floor, and children were stumbling over them and falling down. And there was a sign in the bottom which said, stumbling blocks. These were the toys from the preschool of Hard Knocks. Today is our second sermon on facing stumbling blocks along life's way. And as we saw last Sunday, the Bible addresses the subject of stumbling blocks. In Luke 17:1 and 2, Jesus said, "It is impossible but that offenses will come. But woe unto him through whom they come. It were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and he cast into the sea, than that he should offend one of these little ones." And the phrase, these little ones that believe, include not only children, but also all of those who are novices, who are beginners in the faith. We must not offend other believers and cause them to stumble in their spiritual life, if possible. We must at all times be mindful of our responsibilities toward others and of our influence on other people. I want to point out to you, first of all, this morning, that the teacher can be a stumbling block to the student. I want to notice two passages along that line. The first one is James 1, verses 1 and 2. And I want to read this one in the American Standard Version, where James says, "Be not among you teachers, my brethren, knowing that we shall receive heavier judgment." And then immediately after that he says, "For in many things we all stumble." He cautions the brethren about their desire to be teachers because of the grave responsibility that comes with that position. It's not intended to discourage dedicated teachers who made proper preparation and who teach sound doctrine, but it's meant to be a warning to those hasty to be teachers who may be ill-prepared for such an awesome task and such a weighty responsibility. And the man who goes before others and teaches error will be responsible not only for the error that he teaches, but also for being a stumbling block to others and for leading other people astray. You know, if false teachers would seriously study that, there might be a lot less false doctrine taught. The other passage is found in Revelation. Look at Revelation 2:14 and 15, and look at how the word stumbling block is used there. Revelation 2:14 and 15. Jesus says, "But I have a few things against thee, because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed unto idols, and to commit fornication. So hast thou also them that hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate." That's written to the church of Pergamos, and they had a big problem. Compromise. They were allowing some to set forth the doctrine of Balaam. Now you remember Balaam was an Old Testament prophet who found himself unable to curse God's people. However, he advised Balak, the king of Moab, that if he could entice Israel to immorality, then God would curse them himself. And so in Numbers 25, if you'd like to turn there, I'll give you time. Numbers 25, 1 through 3. Numbers 25, 1 through 3. "And the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab, and they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods, And the people did eat and bow down to their gods, and Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. That's what Balaam was looking for. Now turn over to Numbers 31:16. And that verse provides further insight into this. Numbers 31:16. Behold, these caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to commit trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. And I won't take the time to look at it, but you remember Peter talks about him too. In 2 Peter 2:15, he talks about how Balaam loved the wages of unrighteousness. So back here to Revelation, like Balaam, there was this element at Pergamos that taught God's people to eat things sacrificed to idols and to commit fornication. And then there was also an additional element in the church of Pergamos who taught the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. We're not really sure about that. We think that the Nicolaitans may have taught that freedom in the gospel set men above the moral requirements of the law. Not really sure about that. But whatever the doctrine was, the Lord hated it. And Revelation 2:6 says the Ephesians also hated it. But there were some at Pergamos who tolerated it. And this was an unacceptable compromise. They were fellowshipping those who were teaching that it was all right for Christians to indulge in fleshly lust, and those that were teaching that were stumbling blocks to their students. John says in 2 John 10:11, if there come any unto you and bring not this doctrine, receive him not into your house, neither bid him Godspeed, for he that biddeth him Godspeed is a partaker of his evil deeds. And that's a warning that we have to heed. So the teacher can be a stumbling block to the student. Now you remember last week I told you about going to Los Portales and seeing the truck, and this new couple had been married, and then on the driver's side, pointing to where the husband sat, she wrote, stumbling block. I'd love to know the circumstances of that. But the husband or the wife, secondly, can be a stumbling block to their spouse. This come up Friday as we were recording a Bible answer. Turn to 1 Kings chapter 11. This is one of the most disappointing, defeating, dumbfounding things that happened in the life of King Solomon. In 1 Kings 11, verses 1 through 4, but King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, of the nations, concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wife turned away his heart. For it came to pass when Solomon was old that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. I want you to notice there that it says wives, and then after wives it says princesses. Princesses no doubt reflects the political alliances that were sealed by marriages to kings' daughters. But these wives turned Solomon's heart from the true God to idol gods. They were a stumbling block to him. In Nehemiah 13 and 26, Nehemiah sums up this situation well. In Nehemiah 13:26, Nehemiah says, "Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? Yet among many nations was there no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, even him did outlandish women cause to sin." Olivia Langdon was a believer who married the famous Mark Twain. Mark Twain was an unbeliever. She thought that her sweet spirit and her devout faith would soon win over her husband. In the first few months of their marriage, they had thanks before each meal. They read a chapter in the Bible every day. Such was soon stopped as Mark Twain began to complain about the formality of it. Then they also ceased going to worship at the little chapel. Olivia gave up some of her religious convictions, having faith in the providence and promises of God shaken through her husband's philosophy. And when she came to face death in the end, and knowing that her time was short, Mark Twain said to his wife, "Livy, if it comforts you to lean on a Christian faith, do so." And she answered, "I can't, youth." That's what she called him. "I can't, youth. I haven't any." And the thought that he had destroyed his wife's faith, though he considered such faith to be an illusion, was a terrible trial for Mark Twain in his latter years. He knew that he had been a stumbling block to his wife. How much better it is when two mates are heirs together of the grace of life, 1 Peter 3:7, and on a journey from earth to heaven. In the third place, the parent can be a stumbling block to the child. Mothers can exert a negative influence. In 1 Kings 16:31, it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. Ahab's wife Jezebel was the epitome of feminine wickedness. And I guess her nearest competitor would have been her daughter, Athaliah. Ezekiel later wrote a proverb that was applicable to them. He said, "Behold, everyone that useth proverbs shall use this proverb against thee, as is the mother, so is the daughter." Ezekiel 16:44. And that's the way it was with Athaliah and her mother Jezebel. Athaliah was just like her mother. She watched her mother promote Baalism, hate the law of God, kill the prophets of God, murder good men like Naboth. She was an influencer for evil. Later, she would marry King Joram, the son of the good King Jehoshaphat, and she would influence him to sin. She would also influence her son King Ahaziah to do evil. In 2 Chronicles 22:2, 42 years old was Ahaziah when he began to reign, and he reigned 1 year in Jerusalem. His mother's name also was Athaliah, the daughter of Omri. He also walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, for his mother was his counselor to do wickedly. What a tragedy that was. We don't need mothers who cause their children to stumble. And then fathers may cause their children to stumble. Ephesians 6 and verse 4, "You fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord." We don't need fathers who bring up the children to drink and to curse. One day a new boy came to Bible school. And when the teacher said that their Bible story that day was going to be about Jesus, the boy became frightened and began to cry. And looking into the matter, the teacher began to find out why. This little boy came from an unreligious home. The only time he ever heard the name of Jesus was when his parents were angry and in a fight and engaged in the worst sort of profanity. Here this boy had associated the highest and holiest of names with an enraged mother and an irate father. How tragic it is for children to grow up in homes where God and Christ are just profanities. That's sad indeed. I heard about a grandmother who was making cookies with her 7-year-old granddaughter. They were making snickerdoodles. And the little girl, the grandmother noticed, was just engrossed in the flour. And she had a knife, and with the intensity of a sculptor, she was carefully shaping that fine flour into a pattern of neat, narrow lines. How cute, the grandmother thought. And then her little 7-year-old granddaughter looked up at her and said, "Look, Grandma, this is how Mom and Gary cut their cocaine." Well, those kinds of scenes paint a startling picture of the drug culture's legacy on America's home life. Here's a teenage girl who shares her hopes and dreams with her mother as they binge together on methamphetamine. Here's a boy who bonds with his father over a marijuana-filled bong. And counselors who deal with teen addicts across this country say that parents' complicity has become a significant factor in putting kids on a path to drug dependency. On August the 24th, 2000, a survey in USA Today of nearly 600 teenagers in drug treatment in the states of New York, Texas, Florida, and California indicated that 20% have shared drugs other than alcohol with their parents, and that about 5% of the teens were actually introduced to drugs by their moms and their dads. I wonder how much higher the percentages would be now, some 23 years later. The parent can be a stumbling block to the child. In the next place, a Christian young person can become a stumbling block to their friends. You know, today the word influencer has gotten to be a really big word in our culture today among young people due to the popularity of social media. Over the last decade, we have seen the growth of social media. According to the We Are Social report, nearly 3.5 billion people actively use social media. That's about 45% of the world's population. And this social media boom has given rise to the social media influencer. And influencers leverage their knowledge and their expertise to shape and to mold culture. They build credibility and trust through regular posts and blogs that impact our thoughts and our feelings and our responses. And name brands love influencers because they create trends and fads that help to bolster their sales. Well, the truth is that Christian young people don't need Twitter or Instagram or other forms of social media to influence other people. Did you know that your circle of friends is at the greatest at this time of your life than at any other time of your life? And how important it is that you use your influence for good. The Apostle Paul wrote to Timothy in 1 Timothy 4:12, "Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example to the believers in word, in conversation, in charity, in spirit, in faith, and in purity." Immorality, immodesty in your dress, filthy language can destroy the good influence that you have. Timothy was a young man, and he was out there preaching the gospel. And Paul was greatly fond of him. He was his father in the gospel. He had converted him. He wanted Timothy to do well. And so he gives Timothy a challenge. Let no man despise thy youth. That word despise means look down upon with contempt, or to esteem lightly, or to disrespect. Maybe older people were despising or looking down on Timothy due to his age or his youth. And one way that might be alleviated to some degree would be for Timothy to set forth a powerful Christian example for everybody to see and admire. Though he was young, he could still be the type of example of believers that would cause him to be praised. Back in June 21st, 1997, there was an article in the Jackson Sun newspaper from Jackson, Tennessee, which I think Martha and I received at the time, and it made a profound impression on me. It reminded me, honestly, of my teen years and pranks that were done among my friends that seemed harmless at the time. This headline was, "Friends get 15 years for prank." And it occurred in Tampa, Florida. On the evening of February the 6th, 1996, there were 3 friends who drove the rural roads east of Tampa, Florida, with the intent of playing pranks, and tragically, their game was anything but funny. They pulled some 20 street signs out of the ground, including the stop sign at one terrible intersection. The very next day, 3 other 18-year-old buddies who had just finished bowling breezed through that intersection without stopping, and their car sailed into the path of an 8-ton truck. And the truck hit them broadside, and all 3 of them were killed. 1 year later, the other set of 3 friends who had done the prank of pulling up the stop sign, consisting of a young woman who was then age 21 and then 2 young men who were then age 20, were convicted of manslaughter. In June of 1997, they stood in their orange jail jumpsuits and handcuffs before a judge in a Tampa courtroom, weeping and wiping their eyes as they were sentenced to 15 years in prison. There were family members on both sides of the courtroom who also wept. The 3 young people were told they would be eligible for parole after nearly 13 years. And the judge said he didn't believe for a moment that the defendants pulled up those signs with the intent of causing the death of anyone, but that was the tragic consequence. It's a dangerous thing to take down a signpost on the highway. It's no less dangerous for anybody to vandalize the signpost that God puts on the highway of life. When we honor God's commandments, we point the way to the signpost of life. If we dishonor God's commandments, we become stumbling blocks that harm other people. In 1995, there was a 6'2", 280-pound guy named Clay Shiver. He played center for the Florida State Seminoles. He was regarded as one of the best football players in the nation that year. In fact, one magazine wanted to name him to their preseason All-America football team. But there was a problem. Because the magazine was Playboy. And Clay Schreiber professed to be a Christian. And Schreiber knew well that this could be a great help to his career. Being chosen at that time for that All-American team meant that sports writers regard him as the best in the nation at his position of center. And such publicity never hurts athletes who want to go pro and get a multi-million-dollar contract. However, Schreiber had higher values and priorities, and when informed that Playboy had made their selection and it was him, Clay Schreiber simply said, "No thanks." He turned down the honor. He didn't want to embarrass his mother and grandmother by appearing in the magazine or give his old high school friends an excuse to buy that issue from the stands. He didn't want to put a stumbling block in his friend's way. And Schreiber said this, he said, "I don't want to let anyone down. And number one on that list is God." I pray that all of us would have the same attitude. Or else Sharp wrote in 1890, "Each of us is given a bag of tools, a shapeless mass, and a book of rules, and each must make, ere life is flown, a stumbling block or a stepping stone." We need to be stepping stones rather than stumbling blocks in the path of others. If you need to respond today to the Savior's invitation, we would extend it now. To become a child of God, you can become one by faith that turns from sin, confesses Christ, and puts him on in baptism for the remission of sins. If you need to become a child of God, or if you're an erring child of God and need to come repenting of sin, confessing it, we'll pray with you and for you. As together we stand and sing, won't you come? I hear